When CEO Adelaide Monroe fired a single dad for being too ordinary, she believed mercy was inefficient and power was a clean line upward. Then one brutal week shattered that line. Her board ejected her. A fiancé betrayed her. Headlines mocked her. On a stormy night, her car died on a rural road. A truck stopped. A man stepped out, steady eyes, rain-soaked jacket, calloused hands. Henry Walsh. The janitor she'd humiliated. He didn't accuse. He offered a hand. "Let's get you out of the rain." Adelaide Monroe stood before floor-to-ceiling windows in a San Francisco boardroom, rain streaming down the glass like accusations she couldn't hear. At 34, she'd built a reputation on precision and profit margins that never wavered. The presentation slides glowed green behind her cost reduction initiatives that would trim 15% from operational expenses. Her voice carried the cool certainty of someone who'd never questioned the math. "Compassion doesn't grow profits," she told her executive team, her finger tapping the projected numbers. The room nodded in synchronized agreement. Outside, the storm darkened the morning sky. But inside, everything was controlled light and harder decisions. Her new policy had a name: zero slack. Every department would justify every position. Every role would prove its value in quarterly reports. The words sounded clean in the boardroom, clinical and necessary. Later that afternoon, Adelaide walked the service corridor during shift change, her heels clicking against polished floors that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. She carried a folder termination notices for the janitorial staff, a decision she'd made after reviewing a consultant's efficiency audit. A cleaning cart rolled past, pushed by a man in his mid-30s with careful hands and eyes that held something she didn't have time to recognize. Henry Walsh had just finished his shift, wiping away the day's muddy footprints. Adelaide paused, glanced at the roster, then at him. "People like you sweep floors, not balance sheets." Henry said nothing. He simply nodded, but his eyes held a quiet dignity that should have made her hesitate. It didn't. She signed the document and moved on. That evening, in a penthouse apartment where the city lights spread below like a conquered map, Adelaide stood in front of her own reflection. The rain had followed her home, drumming against the windows. On her desk sat a photograph her mother, who died when Adelaide was 19, standing beside a younger version of her daughter. Tucked into the frame was a handwritten note in fading ink. "Power means nothing without mercy." Adelaide had read those words 1,000 times. She'd never quite understood what her mother meant. Power was the boardroom. Mercy was the luxury of people who hadn't fought their way to the top. She turned away from the photograph and poured herself a glass of wine, watching the rain blur the city into abstract light. At the same time, in a small kitchen 15 miles away, Henry Walsh taught his 7-year-old daughter Ella how to flip pancakes without breaking the circle. The stove light cast warm shadows across the modest space, a kitchen that had seen countless meals and quiet evenings. Ella's tongue stuck out in concentration as she guided the spatula under the golden edge. "Steady hands, sweetheart," Henry said softly. "Don't rush it." The pancake flipped perfectly. Ella's face lit up with triumph. On the counter beside them sat her latest treasure, a glass jar filled with screws, bolts, and washers she'd been collecting. Each piece had a story. Each piece, she insisted, would someday build something important. "Dad, can we make a machine that fixes sad things?" she asked, pouring syrup in careful spirals. Henry smiled, though something behind his eyes looked tired. "Some things you can't fix with machines, Ella, but you can fix them with kindness." She considered this, chewing thoughtfully. "Is that what you do? When you clean at the big building?" "I try to make things better," he said. "Even if people don't always notice." He didn't tell her about the termination notice he'd received that morning. He didn't tell her that he'd once been something other than a janitor, that before Ella was born, before her mother Marissa got sick, he'd been 2 semesters away from a mechanical engineering degree at MIT. He'd left school to care for his dying wife, to hold her hand through chemotherapy and the terrible quiet that followed. After she was gone, he'd taken the first job that had flexible hours and let him be home when Ella needed him. The pancakes tasted perfect. Outside their window, the same rain that fell on Adelaide's penthouse fell on their small house. But here, it sounded different, gentler, like a promise that morning would come. The storm that had been building all week broke on Monday morning. Adelaide arrived at headquarters to find her assistant pale-faced, her inbox flooded with emergency meeting requests. Someone had leaked internal communications sensitive data about planned layoffs, executive bonuses approved while workers were being cut, discrepancies in financial reporting. The press was already running headlines. The stock price dropped 7% before lunch. By noon, Adelaide sat in an emergency board meeting while lawyers and forensic analysts traced the source. The evidence pointed to unauthorized access from an executive terminal. Clinton Reeves, the CFO, sat across the table with practiced concern, his expression perfectly calibrated. He was 38, ambitious, and Adelaide had trusted him to execute the cost-cutting plan. What she hadn't known was that he'd been positioning himself to replace her, that he'd been feeding carefully selected information to board members for months. The vote came swiftly. Adelaide Monroe would take a temporary leave of absence while the company stabilized. The phrase was wrapped in diplomatic language, but everyone in the room understood. She'd been removed. Gwen Harris, the PR chief, offered sympathy that rang hollow. "Take some time," she said, her hand briefly touching Adelaide's shoulder. "We'll manage the narrative." What Adelaide didn't know yet was that Gwen and Clinton had been planning this together, that the leak wasn't an accident but an execution. That while Adelaide had been focused on efficiency, they'd been building an alliance she'd never noticed. That evening, Adelaide met her fiancé for dinner at the restaurant where he'd proposed 6 months earlier. She needed to tell someone what had happened. Needed to feel like something in her life was still solid. She arrived early, took a corner table, and waited. Then she saw them, her fiancé and Gwen Harris, at a table by the window, their heads close together in a way that wasn't professional. His hand covered hers. She laughed at something he said, and the intimacy in that laugh shattered something inside Adelaide that had nothing to do with business. She left without confronting them. Some betrayals were too fresh to touch. By midnight, Adelaide was packing boxes in her office while security waited. She'd been asked to clear out personal items. The photographs came off the wall: degrees, awards, moments of triumph that now felt like scenes from someone else's life. Her hand knocked the frame containing her mother's picture. It fell, glass cracking in a spiderweb pattern. Adelaide stared at it on the floor for a long moment, then left it there. She locked the door behind her for the last time and drove out of the city, heading nowhere in particular, just away. The rain found her on a rural highway in Oregon 2 hours later. It came down in sheets that overwhelmed the wipers, turning the road into a river of reflected red taillights. Adelaide's phone had died miles back. The GPS had lost signal. She was driving on instinct and stubbornness when the car began to shudder. The dashboard lights flickered. The engine made a sound like grinding teeth. Then, nothing. The vehicle coasted to a stop on the shoulder of a 2-lane road surrounded by trees and darkness. Adelaide sat in sudden silence, rain hammering the roof like judgment. She tried the ignition. Nothing. She tried her phone. Dead. Her shoes were designer heels, impractical for mud. Her coat was cashmere, elegant, and useless. She stepped out into the storm anyway, because sitting still felt like giving up, and Adelaide Monroe had never been good at surrender. The mud sucked at her shoes. The rain soaked through her coat in seconds, plastering her hair to her face. The cold bit through the expensive fabric like it was paper. She stumbled forward, not sure where she was going, knowing only that staying meant waiting for help that might not come. Then headlights. A pickup truck, old but solid. Slowing down. It pulled onto the shoulder behind her dead car. The engine cut off. A door opened. A man stepped out into the rain, wearing a work jacket that had seen better years. Even in the darkness, even with water streaming down her face, Adelaide recognized him. The careful way he moved, the steady presence. Henry Walsh. The janitor she'd fired. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence. Adelaide waited for accusation, for the satisfaction he'd be entitled to feel. Instead, Henry simply said, Let's get you out of the rain. His voice held no triumph, no bitterness, just a simple offer of shelter. Adelaide's knees weakened. She'd been standing on pride and momentum, and both had just run out. We'll figure it out, Henry said. But first, let's get you warm. She slipped on the muddy bank. His hand caught her arm rough, calloused, impossibly warm. He steadied her, then guided her to his truck. The interior smelled like coffee and motor oil and safety. He draped a blanket around her shoulders before going to examine her car. Adelaide sat shivering, watching him in the rearview mirror as he checked under the hood with a flashlight. He returned, rain dripping from his hair. Ground wire came loose. I can tow you to my place. Fix it in the morning when there's light. I can call, she started, then remembered her dead phone, her dead network, her dead life in San Francisco. It's not a problem, Henry said quietly. He hooked up the tow cable with practiced efficiency, then climbed back into the truck. As they pulled away, Adelaide watched her car follow behind, like a ghost of her former certainty. The farm appeared through the rain after 20 minutes, a modest house with lit windows that promised warmth. Henry parked near a detached garage, then came around to help Adelaide down from the truck. Her legs had stiffened from cold and shock. She stumbled again, and again his hand steadied her. Inside, the house smelled like pancakes and home. Ella appeared in the hallway, wearing dinosaur pajamas and carrying a stuffed rabbit. She stared at Adelaide with open curiosity. Dad, who's the rain lady? Henry smiled despite everything. Someone whose car broke down. She'll stay tonight while I fix it. Ella accepted this with the easy logic of 7-year-olds. You should give her warm clothes. She's shivering. Adelaide realized she was. Henry disappeared and returned with a flannel shirt and sweatpants clean, worn soft, smelling like laundry detergent. Bathrooms down the hall. Take your time. When Adelaide emerged, wrapped in borrowed clothes that were too big and somehow perfect, she found Ella setting the kitchen table. The little girl had put out 3 plates, 3 glasses, and was carefully folding paper napkins. We have leftover soup, Ella announced. And Dad makes really good grilled cheese. Adelaide sat at the table because she didn't know what else to do. Henry heated soup on the stove, the rich smell filling the small kitchen. He moved with the same careful precision she'd seen in the corporate corridor. But here it looked different, like competence that didn't need to announce itself. They ate in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. Ella chattered about her day, about a science project involving magnets, about how her dad had promised to help her build a real machine someday. Adelaide listened, feeling like she'd fallen into a parallel universe where humiliation was met with soup instead of satisfaction. After dinner, Ella insisted on showing Adelaide her collection of screws and bolts. Each piece had a label where she found it, what it might be used for. Dad says you have to understand how things fit together before you can build something new. Adelaide looked at Henry, who was washing dishes by hand. That sounds like good advice. That night, in a guest room that probably doubled as storage, Adelaide lay awake listening to the rain soften against the roof. She should have felt ashamed. She should have felt angry at the universe for this particular humiliation. Instead, she felt something closer to exhausted relief, like a runner who'd finally stopped running. In the morning, Adelaide woke to sunlight streaming through thin curtains and the smell of coffee. She found Henry already in the garage, her car on jack stands, tools spread on a workbench with the organization of someone who understood systems. She watched from the doorway as he checked connections, tested circuits, narrated his process in a low voice like he was teaching an invisible student. Problem simple, he said without looking up. Ground wire shook loose. Engine couldn't complete the circuit. It's not broken, just disconnected. He showed her the wire, the corroded terminal, the simple fix that looked obvious once someone explained it. Things don't usually need replacing. They need understanding. Adelaide heard the metaphor. She'd spent a career replacing people, cutting away what looked inefficient, never stopping to understand what held systems together. How do you know so much about cars? Henry's hands paused over the engine. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I used to study mechanical engineering. Before, he gestured vaguely at the house. at Ella visible through the kitchen window. Before life changed the plan, before Adelaide could ask more, Ella bounded out with a plate of pancakes. Breakfast. Dad says you can't fix anything. On an empty stomach, they ate standing up, Adelaide in borrowed clothes, Henry in work coveralls, Ella sitting on the workbench swinging her legs. It was the strangest breakfast Adelaide had ever had. It was also one of the most honest. Later, Adelaide found herself washing dishes while Ella dried. Her hands, usually so certain with contracts and spreadsheets, fumbled with the soapy plates. Bubbles floated up and landed in her hair. Ella jiggled. "You're not very good at this," the little girl observed with brutal 7-year-old honesty. "No," Adelaide admitted. "I'm not. That's okay. Dad says everyone starts somewhere." Through the window, Adelaide watched Henry teaching a neighbor how to replace a fan belt, the same patient explanation. The same focus on understanding, rather than just fixing. She thought about her mother's note, about mercy, about what power actually meant when you stopped confusing it with control. "Ella," she asked carefully, "what does your dad do when something seems broken?" Ella considered this seriously. "He listens. He says machines hum when they're happy and make different sounds when something's wrong. You have to listen to know what they need." Adelaide absorbed this. She'd spent so long talking, giving orders, making decisions, announcing changes that she'd forgotten how to listen. To really listen. Not just to wait for her turn to speak. That afternoon, while her car dried after Henry's repairs, Adelaide walked with him to a warehouse at the edge of his property. Inside, under strings of bare bulbs that cast warm shadows, a dozen community members worked on various projects, a man repairing a lawnmower, a woman rewiring a lamp, teenagers taking apart an old motorcycle to understand its components. Henry moved among them like a quiet teacher, offering suggestions, asking questions that led people to their own answers. Adelaide watched him crouch beside an elderly man, struggling with a stubborn bolt, showing him the right angle and leverage without taking over the task. "I thought you were just a janitor," Adelaide said, and immediately regretted the word just. Henry glanced at her. "I am a janitor. I'm also a lot of other things. People usually are." She thought about Clinton, who she'd promoted because his resume looked impressive. About Gwen, whose polished confidence she'd mistaken for loyalty. About Henry, whose custodian uniform had hidden a mind that understood systems better than half her engineering team. "I was cruel to you," Adelaide said quietly. "You were scared," Henry replied. "People who are scared try to control everything. But control and strength aren't the same thing." "Then what is strength?" He smiled slightly. "Knowing when to ask for help. Knowing everyone stumbles. What matters is who we help back up." The phrase stuck in Adelaide's mind like a seed. Over the next few days, Adelaide's car stayed fixed, but she didn't leave. Henry needed help organizing the warehouse workshop. Ella needed someone to quiz her on multiplication tables. The community repair sessions needed an extra pair of hands. Adelaide found excuses, and Henry didn't question them. She learned to sort hardware, to hold a flashlight steady while Henry diagnosed a failing water pump, to explain to Ella how compound interest worked using her jar of collected screws as visual aid. She wore borrowed clothes and forgot to check her reflection, and discovered that her hands, soft from years of executive work, could learn to hold tools without flinching. One evening, while Henry taught a class on basic electrical safety, Adelaide sketched a business plan on the back of a grocery receipt. Not for profit, not for investors, just a structure to make this work sustainable. A way to accept donated broken appliances, teach people repair skills, create a pathway for unemployed parents to learn trades. She titled it, "Second Chance Works." Later, after everyone had left, Adelaide showed Henry her notes. He studied them by the light of the string bulbs, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this," he said finally. "I know. I want to." "Why?" Adelaide looked around the warehouse at the tools, at the chalkboard, covered in Henry's careful diagrams, at Ella's drawing of a machine taped to the wall. "Because I've been building the wrong things, and I'd like to try building something that matters." Henry met her eyes. Something shifted between them. A recognition. A possibility. A door opening that neither had expected. That night, while putting away tools, Adelaide accidentally knocked over a box of old photographs. Among them, she found a faded image of a younger Henry in an MIT sweatshirt, holding a trophy beside a complex mechanical model. The caption read, "Walsh receives award for low-cost turbine design." She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked at the man currently teaching her how to properly coil an extension cord. The same careful attention to detail, the same understanding of how systems worked. "Henry," she said slowly, "why didn't you finish your degree?" He paused. For a moment, she thought he'd deflect. Then he set down the cord and said, "My wife got sick. Marissa, Ella's mom. Cancer." His voice was steady but quiet. MIT could wait. She couldn't. After she died, I had a daughter who needed a parent more than she needed a father with a degree. So I took work that let me be there when she came home from school. Work that paid enough and didn't ask questions. Work that was beneath your education. Work that let me do what mattered most. He corrected gently. Titles don't define worth, Adelaide. Choices do. The words hit like a revelation she should have understood years ago. All her carefully managed hierarchy, her clean organizational charts, her belief that people's value could be measured by their position on a ladder, it was elegant and efficient and completely wrong. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what I said. For how I treated you." "I know," Henry replied. "But apologizing to me isn't the hard part. The hard part is figuring out what you do next. Who you choose to be now that everything's broken." That question kept Adelaide awake that night. Her phone had finally charged. Messages filled the screen reporters, former colleagues. Her father demanding she call immediately. She ignored them all and stood at the window of the guest room, watching the warehouse where a single light still burned. The next morning, Adelaide called her father. Bernard Monroe's voice carried the cold disapproval of someone whose daughter had become a public embarrassment. At 62, he'd built his reputation on traditional success, prestigious boards, influential connections, family honor measured in headlines and net worth. Adelaide's fall from grace was, in his view, a failure of character and strategy. "You need to fight back," he told her. "Hire lawyers. Challenge the board's decision. Reclaim your position." "What if I don't want to?" Adelaide asked. The silence on the line felt like judgment. "What are you talking about?" "I'm working on something else. Something that matters more than a corner office." "Adelaide, you're not thinking clearly. You're embarrassed and hurt, so you're hiding in some rural fantasy. Come home. We'll fix this properly." But Adelaide found she didn't want to fix it his way anymore. She didn't want to return to boardrooms that measured people by their quarterly value. She wanted to build something that Henry would recognize, something that understood worth differently. "I'll call you when I'm ready," she said, and ended the call. Over the following weeks, second chance works took shape. Adelaide used the last of her savings to formalize the structure, non-profit status, liability insurance, a curriculum developed with Henry's input. They established a schedule, repair skills classes 3 evenings a week, weekend sessions for families, partnerships with local businesses to donate broken equipment. The local newspaper ran a small story. The photo showed Adelaide, Henry, and Ella standing in front of the warehouse, holding tools and smiling. Adelaide looked nothing like the polished CEO from her corporate headshots. She looked happier. That's when Clinton Reeves called. His voice was smooth, concerned, perfectly calibrated. He'd heard about her little project. He thought it was admirable, and he had a proposal that would help her save face, restore her reputation, and not coincidentally benefit him. They met at a coffee shop, halfway between the farm and San Francisco. Clinton arrived in a tailored suit, carrying documents that promised redemption. Adelaide arrived in jeans and Henry's borrowed work jacket. "The board regrets how things ended," Clinton lied smoothly. "There's an opportunity to come back. But we need something from you first." He laid out the deal. The company wanted to expand into Oregon, needed land for a new facility. Adelaide still owned the property where the warehouse sat, a remnant of an investment she'd made years ago. If she sold the land to the company, if she supported the development publicly, The board would reinstate her as CEO with a new 5-year contract. Adelaide read the contract carefully. Hidden in the legal language, buried under reassuring phrases about community investment, was a clause that would demolish the warehouse and terminate any non-profit operations on the property. "This would destroy the workshop," she said flatly. Clinton's expression didn't change. "It's the price of coming home, of regaining what you lost." The Monroe family honor. He played the card deliberately, knowing about her father's pressure. Knowing Adelaide had spent her life trying to live up to a legacy that measured success in power rather than purpose. She thought about her mother's note, about Ella's jar of screws, about Henry's patient teaching, and his quiet certainty that everyone deserved a second chance. About the students who came to the warehouse carrying broken things and left understanding how systems worked. Adelaide picked up the contract and tore it in half. Clinton's mask cracked. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret throwing away your career for a janitor and his workshop." "Henry's not just a janitor," Adelaide said calmly. "And I'm not throwing away my career. I'm choosing a better one." She stood to leave, but paused at the door. "By the way, I kept records. Email timestamps, financial discrepancies, your unauthorized access logs. I sent them to the SEC and the board's audit committee this morning. You might want to call your lawyer." She walked out into autumn sunshine, feeling lighter than she had in years. The fallout came swiftly. Within days, federal investigators confirmed the financial irregularities Adelaide had documented. Clinton Reeves was arrested during a company event, cameras capturing his public humiliation. Gwen Harris, caught in the conspiracy, lost her position and faced charges for her role in the data leak and cover-up. The board quietly reached out to Adelaide. They offered apologies, reinstatement, compensation. She declined. She was busy building something more important. Bernard Monroe showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning. Adelaide was teaching a class on basic circuitry when her father's expensive car pulled into the gravel lot. She watched through the window as he got out, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his tailored suit among trucks and work vehicles. Inside, he stood in the doorway of the warehouse, taking in the scene, his daughter in flannel and work boots, teaching a group of unemployed parents how to read a multimeter. Ella sat nearby, assembling a small motor from salvaged parts. Henry worked with a teenager on a motorcycle engine, their heads bent together in concentration. "Adelaide," Bernard said. Just her name, carrying volumes of confusion. She excused herself and walked over. They stood in awkward silence. "This is what you chose?" he finally asked. "Over your career? Over the family name?" "This is my career now," Adelaide said. "And the family name will survive." Bernard looked at the chalkboard covered in Henry's neat diagrams, at the students' learning skills that might lead to jobs, to confidence, to second chances they hadn't imagined, at Ella, who bounced over to show him her motor with unself-conscious pride. "Look, Mr. Adelaide's dad. It works." She pressed a button. The little motor hummed to life. Something in Bernard's expression softened just a fraction, but Adelaide saw it. Her father, who'd spent decades measuring success in stock prices and headlines, watching a 7-year-old beam with pride over a motor built from scraps. "Your mother would have liked this," he said quietly. "She always said you needed to find your own way. I thought I knew what that should look like. Maybe I was wrong. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a crack in the wall." Adelaide took it. Over the following months, Bernard became an occasional presence, still awkward, still struggling to understand, but showing up. He quietly arranged for donations of equipment. He connected Adelaide with grant programs he learned about through his business networks. He was trying, in his careful way, to understand the daughter who'd chosen differently than he'd imagined. By spring, Second Chance Works had expanded. They'd secured grants, established partnerships with community colleges, created a pipeline where students could learn trades while earning certifications. The warehouse glowed with string lights and steady work. The hum of machinery blended with voices explaining, questioning, understanding. One evening, after everyone had left, Adelaide and Henry stayed behind to finish a generator repair for the local community center. Rain had returned, not a storm this time, but a gentle spring shower that drummed softly on the roof. They worked in comfortable silence, hands moving in practiced coordination. Henry adjusted the fuel line while Adelaide checked the electrical connections, their movements synchronized from months of collaboration. "Do you remember what you said that first night?" Adelaide asked. "In the rain? Let's get you out of the rain," Henry recalled. "You didn't have to help me." "I know. Why did you?" Henry set down his wrench and looked at her, really looked, in the way that made her feel seen rather than judged. "Because I've been where you were. Lost. Broken. Needing someone to believe I wasn't just one bad moment. Marissa helped me understand that. And after she was gone, Ella reminded me every day. We're all just people trying to figure it out. Sometimes we need help standing back up." Adelaide felt tears she hadn't expected. "I don't deserve your kindness. Deserve has nothing to do with it," Henry said gently. He reached out, wiped a streak of grease from her cheek with his thumb. A gesture so casual and intimate that her breath caught. "You didn't just apologize, Adelaide. You changed. You showed up every day and did the work. That matters more than deserve. You fixed me," she whispered. "No," Henry said, his hand still resting against her face. "You fixed yourself. I just held the flashlight." "One. He do. No." The rain fell. The warehouse hummed with residual warmth. Adelaide closed the distance between them, and when she kissed him, it tasted like rain and new beginnings, and the terrifying perfect clarity of choosing right instead of easy. When they broke apart, both of them smiling and slightly stunned, they heard a sound from the doorway. Ella stood there in her pajamas and rain boots, having convinced one of the volunteers to drive her over because she'd had a feeling. She grinned at them with the smug satisfaction of a child who'd predicted exactly this outcome. "I told you she'd stay, Dad." Henry laughed, the full, genuine sound Adelaide had been waiting months to hear. He scooped Ella up, and she wrapped her arms around both of them, and for a moment they stood in the warm warehouse like a photograph of something being rebuilt better than it was before. 1 year later, the Walsh Monroe Foundation opened its second location. The ceremony was small, no politicians, no corporate sponsors, just community members and students, and people who understood what second chances actually meant. Adelaide stood beside Henry, wearing a ring that had a small oil stain she refused to polish away. Ella, now 8 and impossibly confident, cut the ribbon with oversized scissors while everyone cheered. Bernard Monroe stood in the back, applauding with an expression that might have been pride. The sign above the door read, "Second Chance Works founded by those who fell and chose to rise." Inside, the new facility hummed with purpose. The Repair for Tuition program had grown beyond anything Adelaide had imagined. Unemployed parents learning trades, broken equipment being restored, knowledge being passed from hands that understood fixing to hands that were learning. The walls were covered with photos, students graduating, machines being repaired, families working together. In one corner, Ella's original jar of screws sat on display with a plaque. Where it started. Every machine begins with understanding how pieces fit together. That evening, after the crowd dispersed, Adelaide and Henry walked through the quiet workshop. Their hands found each other automatically now. A connection that needed no explanation. Through the windows, the city lights spread like possibilities. "Do you ever miss it?" Henry asked. The boardroom. The power. Adelaide thought about her mother's note. About the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. "I used to think power meant being above people. Now I understand it means lifting them up. I don't miss the old version. This matters more." Henry pulled her closer. "Ella asked me this morning if we could build a shelter for people who need a second chance at more than just jobs. Temporary housing, job training, family support. Could we? With the right resources and the right team?" Adelaide smiled, already sketching plans in her mind. "Then let's build it." Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets shone with reflected light. Somewhere in the city, someone's car would break down tomorrow. Someone would lose a job, face a betrayal, stumble into a storm they couldn't control. They'd need someone to offer a hand. Someone to say, "Let's get you out of the rain." And somewhere, In a workshop with warm lights and the steady hum of machines being understood and fixed and given new purpose, there would be people learning that broken wasn't the end, just the place where rebuilding began. Adelaide had swept floors. Henry had balanced more than sheets, he'd balanced justice with mercy, expertise with humility, loss with hope. Together, they'd built something that measured success not in quarterly returns, but in lives changed. Hands taught to repair. Second chances earned through showing up and doing the work. Power, Adelaide finally understood, was this. Not the clean line upward her younger self had imagined, but the messy, beautiful circle of falling and rising, and helping others do the same. The hum of a community learning to listen to what's broken and understanding how to make it whole. The lights in the workshop would stay on late into many more evenings. There was always something to fix, someone to teach, another chance to offer. And every time the rain came, Adelaide would remember a storm, a broken car, a hand reaching out when she'd expected judgment. Sometimes, reflections lie. Sometimes the people you dismiss hold the truth you need. Sometimes, mercy isn't inefficiency, it's the most efficient path to building something that lasts. In the end, they didn't just create a foundation. They became one for each other. For Ella. For everyone who walked through those doors, carrying broken things, and left knowing they had the power to rebuild. The story didn't end with triumph. It ended with work. Good work. Important work. The kind that hummed,